Sweetness. Okay. So I'm not sure. What did I say? Oh, wait, can you talk or am I hogging the mic?
I have no idea.
Oh, cool. I can hear you. So cool. All
Okay,
right.
cool.
So both of us. I wasn't sure if I had set this to the format that only one person can talk at a time, but apparently we both can talk, which is great.
Okay, sweet.
So I understand that you're a Titans fan, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You got Mariota. I've been a Andrew Luck fan for a long time because I'm in Sacramento, and so Luck during college was at Stanford,
Stanford. Yeah.
and so we would root for Luck all the way. And I've been following his career for years, and one of the things that I genuinely believe, and that most of the analysts believed as well, is that Andrew Luck is a once in a generation talent. Someone like Peyton Manning, who he was compared to when he first came out. So for me, the question is, how do you measure when someone should request a trade or not? And I think that the standard would be simply, is it better for them or for the organization? I would contend that it is certainly better that Andrew Luck should request a trade, in fact, even demand a trade away from the Indianapolis Colts for a couple of reasons. Number one, because that team has murdered him. Basically, every year that he is dropping back to pass, he leads the league in sacks. Their offensive line has never been worked on. They don't bring in offensive linemen. They gave him speedy wide receivers, which is cool, but if he doesn't have any time to throw the ball, they're just setting him up to get killed. So when you have a once-in-a-generation talent, you can't hang that talent out to dry, and that's what the Colts are doing to him. The second thing that I believe would be better for him is the chance to win games. No matter how good a quarterback is, he can't win on his own. The Colts have not surrounded him with enough talent. The only thing it seems like the Colts have been bringing in is speedy wide receivers. But they haven't worked on their defense. They haven't worked on their offensive line. And so their team, no matter how many points Luck puts up, it doesn't matter because they lose the games. If Luck wants to have a chance to cement himself as an all-time great, which I think he can eventually be, he needs to go to a different team that can actually give him that opportunity. And I think that's just my general overview of that. So you go ahead now.
Okay, now before I move into any specific arguments as to why Andrew Luck should stay with the Indianapolis Colts, because obviously I feel like he should stay with the Colts, I'm going to move into 3 points of analysis. First one is just talking about what we're talking about inside of this debate, and then the second two are more of burdens, things that you have to prove, that I guess both of us have to prove in order to have our side of the resolution voted for. So the first analysis, if you're writing something down, you can write it down as requesting does not equal action. I feel like this is something that both of us can agree on, that requesting a trade and Andrew Luck requesting to be traded does not equal him actually being traded. You have to look no further than the example of Martavis Bryant. There are a lot of things that go into Andrew Luck being traded than just him saying, I want to be traded. The Colts still have to want to trade him. Other teams have to be willing to invest in him and have to be willing to give the Colts players for Andrew Luck. There's a lot of things that have to go into him being traded. The second analysis is really a burden for both of us, that whichever side of the resolution should the voters at home vote for should be a better situation for Andrew Luck. Obviously, it's my contention that staying with the Indianapolis Colts is a better situation than all of the other probable options that he could go to. But basically, whoever can prove that their side of the resolution is a better situation for him should be the person that wins. And then the third analysis that I'd like to point out is really more geared towards you, and that in order to say that Andrew Luck should request a trade, he has to have a specific team that he wants to go to, and that trade has to be able to happen. So it can't just be like, I want Andrew Luck to go to the New England Patriots, because obviously that's not going to happen. There has to be a real and legitimate trade that is going to happen that makes sense and that team will agree to. So with that in mind, I'll pass it back to you, I guess.
Sure. So I would agree that a request does not equal a trade. But at the same time, the question is simply, has there been enough reason for Andrew Luck to have reason to request a trade? And it doesn't really matter if that actually comes to fruition, although obviously I would hope that it does actually come to fruition. The point is simply, has there been enough that he has seen in his time in Indianapolis that he can then say, okay, it's time to demand a different change of scenery here. Then you talk about how it would be the question of a better situation for Luck. I agree. I think that is the standard that ultimately this does come down to. And then third, you said that he should request a specific team. Well, the two that I can think of off the top of my head would be the Broncos and the 49ers. The 49ers currently have Jimmy Garoppolo, but there's questions about whether or not he would be the long-term answer. They also have CJ Beathard, but there's questions about whether or not he would be the long-term answer. If the 49ers were to – there's talk about how the 49ers could try and sign Kirk Cousins in the offseason. But supposing that doesn't work out, a really good option for them would be to trade for Andrew Luck. That would also serve Andrew Luck very well because that team is, even though they're bad right now, they are on the rise. They have a lot of actually 3 straight first-round defensive line picks. So their defense is starting to look up. They just got their first win of the season, and their team is starting to come together. That situation would be an improvement for Andrew Luck because that is a team that's on the upswing, whereas the Colts are on the downswing. The Broncos would be the other team that'd be interesting here because the Broncos have one of the best pass defenses in the league. And so if Luck was to request a trade to them, he would have some help from the defense. He would also have CJ Anderson and Jamal Charles to take some pressure off them, which is the other thing that the Colts don't have. They don't have a run game. And the Broncos can actually protect whoever their quarterback is. The problem is right now their quarterbacks are Brock Osweiler and Trevor Siemian. So if they were to switch to Andrew Luck, that's a huge advantage for them. And they could probably give away some draft picks and get Luck. So overall, I think that there certainly would be an advantage to either of those teams trading for him. And I think that there are a lot of teams. Basically, any team would be advantaged, apart from maybe New Orleans already has Drew Brees, New England already has Tom Brady, Green Bay has Aaron Rodgers, Matt Ryan in Atlanta. You have some of your elite quarterbacks and everything, but outside of that, any team would be benefited by having Andrew Luck. So if he was to request a trade to any of those teams would most likely follow through with it, and he would most likely be better off as well.
Okay. So now I'm going to move into some individual points as to why I should stay with the stay with the Indianapolis Colts. Then I'm going to respond to a couple of the individual arguments that you brought up. The first point, if you're writing this down, you can write down is stability. He has one of the largest NFL contracts that is in existence right now. And the NFL is overall very unstable. There's everything can change from week to week. If you've heard the phrase, any team can win on any given Sunday, and that's true for contracts. And so with a contract the size that Andrew Luck has, he shouldn't just scoff at that and just go to another team and void that contract that he has with the Indianapolis Colts and go to another team. If you look at the examples of Colin Kaepernick and Brock Osweiler, they had contracts with those teams, but they decided, test the open waters, and they went with other teams. Kaepernick hasn't been signed, but Osweiler went with another team, and he showed how absolutely terrible he was. The second point is really looking at his contract. You can write this down as monetary value. Requesting a trade puts himself at the mercy of whatever team he's requesting a trade to. So when he requests a trade, he has power over the Indianapolis Colts. But what he doesn't have power over is that other team. So with the massive contract that he has now, which according to Over the Cap has him earning, if all of his money comes in, has him earning $122 million with a cap hit of roughly $20 million per year. By trading to another team, he puts himself at the mercy of potentially restructuring that deal in order for him to leave Indianapolis and go to the team that he wants to go to. So by trading, he puts himself at the mercy of other teams. And then the third point that I'll get to inside of this time is of familiarity. The Colts have structured their entire offense entirely around Andrew Luck. He's had 5 years to learn their system. Going to a new team would be starting over from scratch, and more often than not, they already have star players on offense that he would be working around instead of them working around him. He'd have to learn an entirely new offense. Overall, it wouldn't be better for him. But let's look at the two teams that you brought up specifically, of the San Francisco 49ers and of the Denver Broncos. My response to the San Francisco 49ers is that they have no one to trade for Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck, like you said, is a generational talent. I can't even name 3 players on the San Francisco 49ers, let alone 3 players that would be possibly traded for Andrew Luck. They simply don't have enough people. They certainly have the cap space, but they don't have enough people to trade for Andrew Luck. And then if you look at the Denver Broncos, this would be an example of where he would have to restructure. They definitely have the people to trade for him, but they don't have the cap space to do it. In fact, there's only, I believe, 5 teams that can handle the Andrew Luck's contract. That's the Cleveland Browns, who have a cap space of $61 million right now, the San Francisco 49ers, who have a cap space of $57 million, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have $32 million, the Tennessee Titans, who have $31 million, and then finally the Indianapolis Colts, who have $18 million in cap space. But obviously he's already on the Colts, so that doesn't really count. So the Broncos would definitely have to restructure his deal. I believe they only have about $5 million in cap space right now. There's no way they're going to be able to pay him $20 million a year. If he were to go to the Broncos and request a trade to the Broncos, he would absolutely have to restructure. This would overall not be beneficial for Andrew Luck.
Okay, so let me first talk about those teams that you mentioned there. You talked about how the Broncos wouldn't be able to do it because they don't have enough cap space. Well, my response would be they can cut other players. Part of the reason they don't have that cap space is because of their current payroll, but if they cut some of the people on their payroll, that would still be advantageous to them because they're getting Andrew Luck. That's clearly an advantage to them. They'd be willing to do that, so it benefits them in the long run. That would be doable. Most teams, if think about it, I mean, if a team had the opportunity to trade for Aaron Rodgers, they would cut pretty much anyone, right? And Andrew Luck is younger and equally as talented as Aaron Rodgers, so he might actually have more value than Aaron Rodgers long term. So a team would be willing to cut players in order to get under the cap space in order to get Andrew Luck. So I don't think that's actually a worry there. You talk about the 49ers would have no one to trade. Well, my response would be draft picks. The 49ers are weak this year, so they can offer a first-round draft pick, which is likely a top 5 pick. And all of a sudden, you have actually good value being offered for Andrew Luck. Then they could package in some sort of aging veteran, maybe on defense or something. And I think that deal could easily be done. And the Colts would do it because they get a new start with a first-round draft pick, and the 49ers would do it because they get their franchise quarterback. I think that seems like a perfectly reasonable deal, and it winds up benefiting both teams long term. But it particularly benefits Andrew Luck because he winds up in a better location. You talked about, let's go into your arguments here. You had 3 of them. The first was stability, and that it's better for Colin Kaepernick to stay where he is because it's stable there. And you brought up the examples of Colin Kaepernick and Brock Osweiler. Well, to both of those examples, both of them left in free agency. That's very different than demanding a trade. And then as far as stability, my response would be fragility. Even if it's stable, they're killing him. It doesn't matter if you're stable, if you're being sacked far higher than the league average. In fact, last year, part of the reason that Andrew Luck is currently out is injured. Like, they're damaging his career. He can't even play this year because of injuries. Last year, he was sacked in the times that he played. He was sacked 10 times more than the person who was second most sacked, which I believe was Andy Dalton. And so Luck is simply being hung out to dry by the Colts, and it's just they're wasting his talent out here. So even if it's stable monetarily, it doesn't matter because they're killing his potential. He could get that same stability in another franchise where he would actually be protected with an offensive line and maybe win some games. Next, you talked about monetary value. Well, I have 2 responses. My first response is that teams would pay. Like we talked about this earlier, the value of Andrew Luck, it would be comparable to that of Aaron Rodgers. And I guarantee you, if a team had the chance to get Aaron Rodgers, they would pay. They'd be willing to pay what they can. But the second response here would be that of actual success. Even if Andrew Luck did have to take a little bit of a cap hit, he's still making millions of dollars. And more importantly, he's cementing his legacy for the future. He's going to have a chance to actually win games and go down as the all-time great that he really should be known as, but that he's being prevented from having in Indianapolis. And the last point you have is that of a new offense, and that it would be difficult for him to adjust himself to a new offense. My response is that it's still doable. Sure, it might take a little bit to do, but if the potential advantages of that, like if he's going to start actually winning games, he's going to be able to connect with a new receiver. Maybe he can connect with Pierre Garçon or Demaryius Thomas. Emmanuel Sanders, and we're talking about the 49ers and the Broncos there. He has actual weapons he can start to connect to, and it might take a little bit of time to learn that offense and learn how it adjusts, but the long-term potential is he's not going to be beat up all the time, and he can actually win games. That's certainly an advantage for him long-term. The last thing that I want to talk about is just the ownership of the Colts. I believe the reason why they do not deserve Andrew Luck is because they've taken him for granted. And one of the things that I think shows this the best is recently this year, Andrew Luck has not played. And so he had to go and get surgery on his shoulder. And so when Jim Irsay, the Colts owner, was asked about it, he said, you know what? I think this is all in Andrew's head. The problem with that is, first of all, that means that the ownership isn't getting behind their quarterback. They're not defending their franchise man like they should be. But more than that, if Irsay is right that all of Andrew Luck's injury is in his head, why is he so scared? Why is your franchise quarterback have a mental fear of getting back on the field for you? That tells you you're doing something wrong. And that's really the big issue that I have here, which is that Andrew Luck has no protection in Indianapolis, which is why he needs to go somewhere else, get a change of scenery, and have a chance to cement that legacy.
Okay, so I'm going to be responding again to some of the individual points that you brought up. But before I do that, I'd like to bring up, a separate point as to why I should stay in Indianapolis. Really, 2 points that I'll tie in later with the responses to some of the things. The first one is that the Colts are still contenders. They're only 2 years removed from having a deep playoff run to the AFC Championship with the whole Deflategate crap. They're a first and second round offensive tackle and running away from being contenders. A certain Penn State running back and certain Notre Dame offensive tackle, they're those 2 players away from being contenders again. Could you imagine the Indianapolis Colts offense with T.Y. Hilton, Saquon Barkley, and Andrew Luck? It would be insane. The defense wouldn't have anyone to cover because there's just weapons everywhere. And Andrew Luck understands this and he knows this. The Colts are in line to have the 2nd overall pick in the draft right now. That's prime position to either trade out and pick Saquon Barkley later, or 2nd or 3rd. I'm not exactly sure where they are, but they're definitely in the top 4 of the draft. They're in a prime position to either trade out of that spot, get more draft picks, and draft Saquon Barkley later, or just take Saquon Barkley high in the draft where he deserves to go. He's a crazy athlete, crazy Heisman player. Also, the Colts have done great things on their defense this year. The signing in the first round of Malik Hooker, he's a generational safety talent out of Ohio State. Chris Ballard, their GM that they added this year, has made great strides on defense. Statistically, they're a lot better than they were last year. Obviously, it's not going to be an overnight thing. They're not going to become, the Seahawks or the Broncos defense overnight, but they're making significant strides from the from the Swiss cheese defense that they were last year. They're pretty mediocre this year, but they're a lot better than horrible like they were last year. The second concept that I'll bring up is that there's no guarantee that he'll accept the trade. This really goes back to my first analysis point. So all it does, all that's certain with Andrew Luck requesting a trade is it puts him in bad light with the Indianapolis Colts ownership. Sure, that trade might happen, and sure, he might get traded to the Broncos or to whatever team he requested trades to, but whatever team he requests to trade to. But that's all maybes and mights. What is certain out of Andrew Luck requesting a trade is that he's going to be put in bad light with the Indianapolis Colts ownership. That's overall not something that he should be doing, regardless of where he ends up. So now I'll move into some individual responses that you had to my case and respond to some of those. Your response to my cap hit point against the Denver Broncos is that they could cut other players. And my response is that they're not going to sacrifice their defense for an injured player. And this is something that I'm going to be bringing up a lot later. Andrew Luck currently kind of has the J.J. Watt effect. Everybody knows that J.J. Watt is a crazy generational talent. And there was some talk about him being traded in the offseason this year as well. But he's hurt. Teams don't know if Andrew Luck is going to be the Andrew Luck of his second year or his rookie year. They don't know if he's going to be as good as he was. This is a serious injury to his throwing shoulder. There's a lot of concern out there about whether Andrew Luck is going to return the same way that he was before. The Denver Broncos aren't just going to cut players from their star defense, which I'll remind you is where most of their cap is tied up in their defense. The Broncos aren't just going to cut players in their defense for a player that is coming off of a 2-year season-ending injury. And then in your response to you're saying that the San Francisco 49ers can trade draft picks for Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck is a franchise quarterback. You're not just going to trade him for a couple of first-round draft picks. You're going to need players as well as draft picks to get Andrew Luck to another team. It's not just as simple as trading draft picks. There's more to it than that. And then moving into your responses to my 3 points, you talked about how the Colts are hurting him a lot, and I'll agree with that. The offensive line is pretty bad. But my response, you can tie this back to my first concept that I brought up, that the Colts are on the rise. Since Chris Ballard being hired as the GM, the Colts team overall, despite their record being really, really terrible, their team overall hasn't been as bad as it used to be. Their defense is getting better. Their offensive line is getting better. And I think he's poised to make big moves inside of the draft in free agency this year, especially with the cap room that they have and especially with the draft spaces that they have right now. Your response to my second point is that teams would play. My response is similar to what I said to the Denver Broncos, is that they can't and won't. Most teams don't have the cap to just straight up take Andrew Luck while trading players. And I doubt that they would cut players just to take Andrew Luck because of the season-ending injury. This is a serious injury. We're not sure how he's going to return. In your response to my third point, is that he has the best chance for success. That he can still learn other teams' offense, but his best chance for success is staying with the offense that he knows and that is tailored entirely around him. Sure, he can go to another team, he can go to a Jacksonville, he can go to a Denver and learn that playbook, and he can probably learn it relatively quickly, but that offense isn't going to be the same way Indianapolis's offense is tailored around him. The Colts are on the rise. He has the money that he needs in order to, be a multi-million-dollar athlete, and he has the team that is supportive of him, and the offense is built entirely around him.
Okay. So, first of all, your first point was that the Colts are still contenders. I have 3 responses. My first response is the second overall pick. You said that the Colts are going to have the second, maybe the third or fourth overall pick in the draft. Well, that right off the bat tells you they're not on the rise. They're 2 years removed from a playoff push, and now they're one of the worst teams in the league. That tells you they're on the downfall, not the rise. Secondly, you talk about how they have a new GM. I believe you said a new GM, and that he was picking up players like Malik Hooker, which was improving their defense. And so a couple responses to that. My first response is that of a track record of failure. Even though they might be having some steps in the right direction, the overall track record is going downwards, and there's no reason to believe that with the same ownership that's currently there, they've actually done this about face when they're currently in the midst of plummeting. That doesn't make any sense. They're getting worse, not better. And then the second response here would be that it'll take too long. Even if you're right that they are finally making the right moves, it's going to take a long time to go from the depths of the bottom of the NFL up to where they need to be for Luck to have worth in remaining in this place, especially if it takes a long time to develop the offensive line. So he's getting killed over and over and over again, sacked far more than even the person in second for sacks totals. If he's getting hit that often, it's just not worth it for him to stay there, especially since it's going to take several years before they actually get to this level where you're talking about they'd be on the rise. They're not there yet. It's going to take time. You then talked about how there's no guarantee that the trade would be accepted, and that this might have a problem because then he'd be in a negative situation with the Colts ownership. Well, my response would be he has the power. When we're talking, let's go back to Aaron Rodgers again. If Aaron Rodgers says, okay, I'm not playing, you need to trade me, then the option for the team is, okay, well, we have the quarterback and he's not going to throw a pass for us, so we have to get something for him. So they trade him. Andrew Luck is the same way. If he says, okay, I can't do this, I can't stand in there and get killed over and over and over again, I need a change of scenery. And it's okay. You guys can get a really good amount of value from me. He can demand that trade and he can make it happen. You talked about how the Broncos would not sacrifice for an injured player. My response, Peyton Manning. Sorry, they had Peyton Manning, who at age 38 was coming off of an even bigger shoulder injury. He's 10 years older than what Andrew Luck is right now. They won the Super Bowl with Peyton Manning. I think that pretty clearly disproves that they wouldn't take an injured player like that. You talked about how the 49ers wouldn't do it because the draft picks, and it wouldn't be worth it to trade draft picks. Or I think that was, you were saying the Colts wouldn't do it because they'd only get draft picks back from the 49ers. Well, my response would be Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer was traded for first round draft picks, and he's not even good. So yeah, you can trade quarterbacks. You can trade all-star quarterbacks for draft picks. That does happen. And there are numerous quarterbacks who have been traded for draft picks. And the 49ers will have a lot of draft picks they could offer for Andrew Luck. So really, honestly, any team that had the opportunity to get Luck would do it. And yeah, okay, they might not pay as much for him because he's coming off of an injury, but it's not like they're going to go, oh, he was injured once, therefore we will not pay anything for one of the most generational quarterbacks that we've seen in years. They'll pay for him. They would easily do that, and it would significantly improve them. It would significantly improve Luck. And then your response to my point about fragility was that the Colts are on the rise. Well, I already responded to this. The Colts are not on the rise for quite a few reasons. You talked about how it would be uncertain that teams would pay. Also already responded to that. And finally, you responded to your third point about and Luck would have to learn a new offense by saying that he should do what is doable, which is the best chance so he should stay where he already knows the offense. And I'm just going to refer you back to the fact that, yes, he might know an offense, but it isn't hard to learn a new offense. And more importantly, if the offense he knows is killing him, that's not the right offense to be. It's better to go to an offense that can actually offer him protection, that can actually give him a chance to cement his legacy and become this generational talent that we all know he can be. He just needs the opportunity, and the Colts aren't giving him that.
All right. I'll respond to your still contenders point. You said you had 3 responses, but I only caught 1. Sorry if I missed the other 2. You said that they have the 2nd overall draft pick, and I get that on the surface, yeah, it looks really bad. The Colts do have the 2nd overall draft pick. You know, they were 8-8 last year. They were, I believe, it was 10-6 the year before. It appears that they're only going down. But I have 2 separate responses to the 2nd overall draft pick point. The first one is that they're the 2nd overall draft pick without Andrew Luck and without Malik Hooker. You know, these are 2 critical pieces. These are 2 critical players to both sides of the ball. You know, the safety position is widely considered, especially the free safety position, as the quarterback of the defense. You know, they lost him about halfway through the season. That's not a good thing for their defense. And, you know, Andrew Luck, as we've said, is a generational talented quarterback. The Colts would be infinitely better with Andrew Luck at quarterback. That's overall why they're as bad as they are now. Their record doesn't really reflect how bad they are. They're probably an 8-8 team with Andrew Luck and with Malik Hooker, but they're not 2nd overall pick bad. My second response you can tag as a new GM. I'm going to be talking a lot about Chris Ballard, but the reason they've been declining rapidly is because their old GM, I forget his name, he wasn't very memorable, wrecked literally everything with their franchise. They cut every single offensive lineman that was worth anything. They got rid of every single piece of help that could have helped Andrew Luck, and they just completely wrecked the offense. A new GM changes absolutely everything, and we can see that with Chris Ballard's track record. He's making strides to build in the trenches and to build the defense to help protect Andrew Luck and make the Colts contenders again. He's only been the GM for about half a season now. And in the half the season that he's been GM, he's made great deals and he's made great trades with Malik Hooker and he brought in, I believe it was a couple offensive linemen, made Ryan Kelly a captain. You know, these are things that are very important to making Andrew Luck and the Colts a better team as a whole. You brought up the example of a track record of failure. I'll respond again with good general managers change everything. Look at the Tennessee Titans. You know, their old general manager, Rustin Webster, was absolutely terrible. They were 13-3. The next year, they brought in John Robinson, and he took them with all of the changes that he made and the trades that he made with the Rams for Jared Goff. You know, they fleeced the Rams out of all of those picks so they could pick Jared Goff. With all of the deals that John Robinson made and the players that they brought in, they were a 9-7 team next year. They went from the 1 overall pick in the draft to 9-7 and being barely eliminated from the playoffs off of Marcus Mariota breaking his leg in the second to last game of the season. A general manager and a good general manager at that. Chris Ballard is widely considered as a really good general manager. I would also like to remind people watching and my opponent. A general manager and a good general manager can change everything around a franchise. And you also brought up the concept that it takes a while to grow from a really bad team into a really good team. That's not really true, empirically proven. There have been plenty of teams that have gone from really, really bad one year to pretty good the next year. You look at the example of the Titans. They were 3-13, and then went to 9-7 the next year. General managers and quarterbacks coming back change everything. You also brought up the example of how Andrew Luck has the power. This is not entirely true. When the player says that they're not going to play and the team still wants them to play, it creates something called a holdout. We saw that this year with Dwayne Brown. He said that he wanted to be moved. We saw it also with Martavius Bryant. It creates bad light for the team and it creates bad light for the players. When a player says that they want to be traded and the team doesn't want to trade them, it either creates a holdout or it does bad things for that player. The example of Martavius Bryant and also Dwayne Brown with the Texans. Dwayne Brown eventually got moved, but he didn't play for the entire first half of the season. You also brought up the example about how Broncos wouldn't sacrifice, and you brought up the example of Peyton Manning. That was pretty funny. But I really have 2 responses to this. The first one is that of free agency. They signed Peyton Manning for a pretty cheap deal considering how good he was. It's not the same as absorbing. Say Peyton Manning had an $118 million contract. I'm positive that if Peyton Manning had an $118 million contract and they were trading for him after coming off of a season-ending injury on his throwing shoulder, they absolutely would not have traded for him. So free agency played a big factor in that happening. And second, it's Peyton Manning. Sure, Andrew Luck is good and he's generational, but he doesn't have the same accolades that Peyton Manning had. When he went to the Denver Broncos, I believe he had won 3 Super Bowl, but he'd been to 2. Andrew Luck hasn't made it past the AFC Championship round yet. He hasn't even made it to a Super Bowl yet, let alone win one. But by the time Andrew Luck was picked up by the Denver Broncos, it's a completely different circumstance. He was already a bona fide Hall of Famer. Completely different circumstances. You also use the example about how they're willing to trade draft picks for quarterbacks. You brought up the example of Carson Palmer. My response is that Carson Palmer is not comparable. He's at best a mid-tier quarterback. He's good, but he's nothing like Andrew Luck. He's nothing like Marcus Mariota. He's nothing like all of these good young quarterbacks that are, generational talents that are widely considered as, the future Hall of Famers in the league. Carson Palmer's a mid-tier quarterback. He's like the Andy Dalton and Joe Flacco's of the world. It's not really comparable to this situation. And I believe that's all I have, so I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, so you started by talking about how the Colts are on the uprise, and you talked about how they've done what they've done this year without Andrew Luck or Malik Hooker, and that you think they'd be 8-8 with those guys. Well, my response would be a turn. They're without Andrew Luck because of their poor offensive line. That's the whole reason why Luck needs to request a trade in the first place, because he's being killed. They are sacrificing his future, and they're getting him injured. And we're talking about all these things about his value and how it might have been hurt and how this is hurting his throwing shoulder and how teams aren't viewing him as well. Well, that all happened because he stayed with the Colts too long. If he stays with the Colts even longer, that potentially gets even worse. So, no, just because they would be an 8-8 team with Andrew Luck doesn't mean that the Colts are on the uprise. It means that he is incredibly talented and they are wasting him. You then talked about how they have the new GM, and you talked about Chris Ballard and how great Chris Ballard is. Well, I'm going to refer you back to the point that it'll still take too long. And I have two subpoints to this. My first subpoint is that of talent. You talked about how teams can turn around quick and that it often can be within a year they can turn around. Well, that's only if they have the correct amount of talent. The Colts do not have the correct amount of talent to be able to turn around like that. Even if Andrew Luck and Malik Hooker were there, you just said they'd be 8-8. That's not enough. My second response is that of offensive line. Even if the turnaround could happen quickly on skill positions and all the rest of it, their offensive line is still the worst in the league, has been the worst in the league for years, and that's not going to turn around in 1 year. So even if the team was doing amazingly, even if they were 11-5, 12-4, Andrew Luck is still going to be sacked at around the highest level in the league, and that's just not worth it for a person whose generational talent is dependent on not being murdered. But that's what they're hanging him out to dry. They're getting him killed. You talked about how you responded to my point about how Andrew Luck has the power by saying that it would turn into a holdout. And you gave the examples of Martavis Bryant and Dwayne Brown. My response to that would be not superstars. Martavis Bryant is not a superstar. He's the second, maybe even the third best wide receiver on his own team. So, yeah, I mean, he can cause a holdout, but he's not a superstar. It's not like they have to do anything about it. If Andrew Luck says, okay, guys, I can't take this anymore. You need to trade me. They're going to trade him. They have no other option. They either let him sit and do nothing and they pay him money to sit and do nothing, or they trade him and get a significant amount of value for him, which they would do. You then talked about how the response to Peyton Manning was that it was free agency as opposed to a trade. My response, bidding war. Actually, if you look at what was going on back then, there was a bidding war for Peyton Manning. Even at age 38, coming off of season-ending shoulder injury, the 49ers, who I follow myself, they were trying to get him, and they had a high bid on him, and the Broncos had a high bid on him. There were talks about the Browns trying to go for him. The Texans were trying to go for him. Lots of teams were trying to go for Peyton Manning, even at age 38, coming off of season-ending shoulder injury. Clearly, the teams will be willing to go for a player who can be incredibly useful to them and potentially win them a Super Bowl. The Broncos really are probably a quarterback away from being Super Bowl contenders again, and Andrew Luck would be that for them. So yeah, they might have to give up a little bit in terms of some players or in terms of draft picks, but they would do that. They have the option for it. We've already seen they're willing to pay for it. They did that with Peyton Manning. They would do it again. John Elway clearly has a thing for quarterbacks, and Elway would even have the Stanford connection there with Andrew Luck. I'm sure he would love to have Andrew Luck running that offense. Then you talk about how Carson Palmer is not comparable because he's not as good as Andrew Luck and he's not young. Well, my response is that this contradicts your other points, where you're talking about how Andrew Luck is injured and so he's not actually that valuable and that teams wouldn't be willing to pay for him. And now you're saying Andrew Luck is so valuable, so he can't be compared to Carson Palmer. Well, well, which one do you believe? I would say that the answer is probably somewhere in between the two. That Andrew Luck does have the potential to be a generational talent, but that his value isn't as high as it could be because of the injuries. So teams can and should trade for him now because they actually can get him probably at a little bit lower price than they would get him some other time. And as for Andrew Luck, he should still demand the trade now because even if the Colts were to get better, it doesn't really matter because he's still going to suffer behind that terrible offensive line for several years and potentially put his entire future at risk. He should not do that. It would be better for him, better for the Colts, and better for whatever team he goes to for him to demand a trade and go somewhere else.
All right. I'll first respond to the turn that you brought up. That you said you turned my 8-8 point by saying that they're without Andrew Luck because of their poor offensive line. They're this bad. My response is that there's not really a turn there. The point that I was trying to make there was that their team isn't really as bad as their record indicates. They're mediocre at best. They're an 8-8 team with all of their players back healthy. I don't really see how this is a turn. Their offensive line is decent. It's not as bad as it was last year. Their sack numbers are down from what they used to be. It's getting better. Their team as a whole is getting better. The reason their record is so bad while their team is still getting better is because Andrew Luck and Malik Hooker aren't there. That's really the point that I was trying to make. I don't really see how that's a turn. The point that you brought about how it takes too long. You brought up two sub-points underneath is about how there isn't enough talent, and you brought up the example again of the offensive line. My response is that there's a draft this year, and they're primed to take two really good picks. There's an offensive tackle coming out of Notre Dame that is widely regarded as, again, a generational talent, except this time at the offensive tackle position that hasn't played overall that well this year. It is projected to go in the second and third round, and also Saquon Barkley. These are two players that could dramatically change that team and that offense as a whole, that can change it all in one draft. I know that I'm talking about the Titans a lot, but look at Jack Conklin. They had, some pieces in place, but the Titans took Jack Conklin with the 8 overall pick, the offensive tackle, and their offensive line went from being the worst in the NFL to the second best in the NFL, behind only the Dallas Cowboys. One draft pick, believe it or not, can change an entire offense and an entire offensive line. And in the case of Jack Conklin on the Titans, who was regarded as a generational run-blocking tight end, that is exactly the case. Then also looking at the offensive line, there's some really good offensive linemen coming out in the draft this year, and I believe there's also a couple good offensive linemen coming out in free agency. I believe Whitworth is set to become a free agent. I don't think the Rams will let him walk because he's done so well for them this year. But, there's a lot of players that are coming out in free agency this year that would be sufficient to fit the offensive line that they have. And you brought up the example about, in response to my holdout point, about how Dwayne Brown and Martavis Bryant aren't superstars. And I'd like to turn this on you. I'd like to turn this back on you. That because Andrew Luck is a superstar, that makes it especially more reasonable to assume that the Colts are just not going to trade him and it's going to end in a holdout, which is not beneficial for any of them because Andrew Luck isn't getting paid and he's not playing, and the Colts aren't getting their star quarterback on the field. So because he's a star quarterback, they're especially not going to let him walk, and they're especially not going to let him go, even if he wants to request a trade. You brought up the example again of Peyton Manning, about how there was a bidding war for Peyton Manning, and that the Broncos would be willing to give up a little bit for Andrew Luck. I really have two responses to this. My first response is that the bidding war for Peyton Manning is still cheaper than $119 million. I use the example again that if the Broncos had to sign Peyton Manning to an $119 million contract, or even not $119 million, because they wouldn't sign him to a 6-year contract, but let's say a $40 million contract, because it's $20 million per year for Andrew Luck. So they had to sign Peyton Manning to a 2-year, $40 million contract. I highly doubt they would do that. They simply don't have the cap space. They had the defense in place, but they would have to give up defense. They'd have to cut defensive players or restructure defensive contracts, leaving those players unhappy in order to sign Peyton Manning. And then also looking at, and also response to your giving up a little bit point. In order for the Broncos to trade for Andrew Luck, it's not just giving up a little bit. We're talking about, 2 to 3 years worth of first and second round draft picks, and also, a couple key defensive players. It's not just a little bit for Andrew Luck. They're going to have to give up a massive amount of draft picks and players in order to get this quarterback. Your response to my Carson Palmer point, you brought up the example of a contradiction about how Andrew Luck, how I said that Andrew Luck is better than Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer wasn't comparable to the situation because he's bad. My response is that Carson Palmer isn't even as good as a hurt Andrew Luck. The trade value for Carson Palmer isn't anywhere near comparable to even a hurt Andrew Luck. That's why it isn't comparable. I'm not even talking about a healthy Andrew Luck when I'm saying it's not a comparable deal. A hurt Andrew Luck still has better value than a fully healthy Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer isn't that good. And I'm not sure if I'll have any time left inside of my next for a next speech, so I'll just close with sort of a closing remark, unless I don't get any more time. Is that the two teams that he's really boiled today's debate around that Andrew Luck could potentially go to, of the Broncos and 49ers? We haven't really talked about how bad that their offensive lines as a whole are as well. The 49ers are the worst team in the NFL right now. No, second worst team in the NFL right now. No, sorry. They're really bad, and their offensive line is also really bad. The Broncos' offensive line is really bad as well. So he talks a lot about how the Colts' offensive line is bad and about how it's getting Andrew Luck hurt. But I have empirical evidence to show that the Colts' offensive line is getting better, and it's going to get really good after they take some of these guys in the draft this year. But he hasn't shown any evidence to suggest that the Broncos and 49ers are going to be getting any better or be better than the Colts' offensive line in a couple years after Andrew Luck goes to those teams. And so I'll cede the rest of my time to you.
Okay, cool. So I actually just looked this up, and apparently the pass protection rankings currently have the Broncos at number 10 in terms of offensive line, the 49ers at number 14, and the Colts are all the way down at number 26. So yes, it would be an improvement for him to go to either of those teams. And let's see here. Yeah. You talk about how the Colts are not as bad as their record indicates. And then you responded to my point about it taking too long by saying that there would be two really good picks available in the draft. Well, my response would be, I have two responses to this. The first response is that it takes time to develop. Even if you're right that they get new good picks, which we can't even guarantee that they're going to make good draft picks, but even if they did, it still takes rookies a long time to actually become good and to start making a difference. So yes, eventually Saquon Barkley and an increased offensive line could probably turn that team into contenders. But that's not going to happen in a year. It's not going to happen in 2 years. It probably won't happen in 3 years. It's unlikely it'll happen in 4 years. By the time it happens in 5 years, we're talking about Andrew Luck in his mid-30s. He's already sacrificed the majority of his career for a team that has given him nothing. It's just not worth it. My second response is that there were 5 on the offensive line. When you talk about trying to improve an offensive line, you can't just improve it by picking one offensive lineman. You have to pick 5 different offensive linemen plus tight ends. So no, it's not as if this is going to increase in 1 year. You'd have to increase it over the course of maybe 5 years. And even then, each of those players have to develop and have to improve. So no, it's not as if the Colts are going to be better anytime soon. They're one of the worst offensive lines in football. They've been one of the worst offensive lines in football for a long time. They're hanging Andrew Luck out to dry, getting him killed, destroying his career. We talk about his injury and everything. That is destroying his value. It's destroying his chance to be one of the greatest of all time. You talked about how Andrew Luck is a superstar, which you turned and you said that would cause problems if he tried to hold out. Well, my response to this would be it means he has the power. If Andrew Luck actually wants to get traded, he can make it happen. The Colts can either pay a significant amount of money to him to sit on the bench and do nothing, or they could try and get value for him. And there would be a lot of value if they offered a potential once-in-a-generation talent to someone else. Even if that person is coming off of injury, they can still get value for him. You talk about how the difference between Luck and Manning is the length of their deals and how Manning would only have had a 2-year deal and there probably need to be a longer deal for Luck. Well, the thing is, most teams would be willing to do that. Think of the 49ers would love to have a 7-year deal for Luck. The Broncos would love to have a 5 to 7-year deal for Luck. So yeah, sure, it might cost them something and they'd have to go through that, but they would do what it takes to make it happen. I looked up, did a search for Andrew Luck trade, and the first things that come up are people talking about how any team would trade for him, like For the Win talks about that. And I was interesting because the two people who they came up with were the same two I came up with, Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco or Denver, opposite side of a Super Bowl winning defense in Denver, both of which they believed would actually have the ability to trade for Andrew Luck and that they would try and do so. Was he available? The last thing you talked about was Carson Palmer and how it's not comparable. Well, my response is simply the available amount of value. It doesn't really matter what has happened before, although in the past we actually have seen franchise quarterbacks and all-star quarterbacks, because Palmer is an all-star. We have seen them traded for draft picks. But it doesn't even matter if that's what has happened before as what would make sense in a trade now. The question is, can a team get better by having Andrew Luck? And the answer is absolutely. Then the question is, can Andrew Luck get better by going to a different team? And the answer is absolutely. He can have an actual offensive line protecting him. He can have a change of scenery. He can have so much more value if he goes somewhere else. This is why Andrew Luck will be better off demanding a trade away from the Colts, and any team that gets him